help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I'm Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. And we are going to do just that once again. Praise God. The second full 40 Days for Life campaign post-Roe will be our largest ever. Coming up in just a couple of weeks at the end of September. So go to 40daysforlife.com and find your location. It's just amazing to see how the world's kind of lost their minds on a lot of fronts. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, we see these wussy politicians that are terrified of abortion coming up. Republicans mainly. Democrats definitely want abortion to come up. Because they know many of the Republicans don't have a good answer. So we see that happening. We see the bizarre responses to abortion. If you haven't already, in my personal opinion, which is weird because we record these and we don't really know what to think of them. Sometimes we're like, oh, that was a good podcast or that was bad. And obviously the numbers dictate that. And it's often surprising. But what I thought was a good podcast was the one we did on the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, because it shows how we have really entered a new, an even braver and newer world. In the post-Roe world, is the Washington Post basically wrote a story trying to convince you and me that these two beautiful twin girls who were born because their parents couldn't abort them because of evil Texas abortion bans, that these kids should be dead. Or maybe they should live. I don't know. It was just odd. And if that's where they are, that's good for our movement as we move forward to end all abortions. So be sure to check out that podcast. It was very, we really broke it down, and it kind of puts your foot in the water so you can tell the temperature and all of the bizarre things that you hear in our culture today. You don't have to listen to that noise because there's a lot of good going on, and we're going to cover that today. And part of that good is that we're going to have the largest 40 Days for Life campaign ever in the fall, okay, in a couple of weeks. And that's phenomenal. That means that the silent majority is still more active than it was when we had Roe. You hear a pro-lifer who's been infected with a virus that makes them say that the overturning of Roe was bad. You can tell them that it was good and that the pro-life movement is more active now than ever. And besides that, obviously, babies are being born who otherwise would have been murdered. And so we are extremely grateful that Roe was overturned, and it was definitely not free. And we have many challenges, and we will meet those this fall with the largest campaign ever. Today, our topic is 7 things you will learn when you join a 40 Days for Life vigil. 7 things you'll learn when you join a 40 Days for Life vigil, and someone who no longer needs to learn anything because he is overflowing with wisdom is my co-host today, Mr. Steve Carlin, who joins us from Madison, Wisconsin. Steve, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. That's right. I got my PhD at the School of Hard Knocks, so I've learned it all, frankly.
What's your PhD in? Everything.
That's right. I know things.
I know things. I have a question for you because the day that this podcast is coming out is August the 28th, I believe. That's correct. Happy feast day to St. Augustine. Great feast day. There'll probably be just some conversions today on the podcast because Augustine had a rather dramatic conversion, thanks to
all
his
the people
mom,
who don't like the banter section are going to suddenly awaken to its beauty.
Yes, because we mentioned St. Augustine, who is extremely, extremely quotable. My heart is restless until it rests in thee. One of his great quotes. He's got a lot of great quotes.
I was glad for someone who just proclaimed himself to know everything from the School of Hard Knocks. I'm glad that that quote was on page 1 of the Confessions, because I think it was the only thing that I understood from that entire book.
How old were you when you read the Confessions?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Were you over or under 25?
I was over. It's a shame for me.
Okay, then don't reread it. Because I read it like in high school, and I was like, "This is awesome! I'm reading Augustine. What's he talking about?" You know. And so then I read it. I was probably 28. I remember like being on a plane reading it. I know I was in a Holiday Inn at some point on that trip, but it's a short book. And I read it, and it's good. It's not as confusing the older you get. So maybe you just got stuck on a couple of points.
I should have looked up the word firmament a lot earlier in the process. I didn't know what that meant, and it may have gone better had I looked that up, because that word appeared over and over again. That was my takeaway after Our Hearts Are Restless.
Yeah, firmament is in there. The other thing with Augustine that's really weird and unfortunate is that I had help on is I asked like a professor that I knew who was a St. Augustine nerd, what translation should I buy? Because it's like the Imitation of Christ, and we should promote some of the translations, because some of them are awful. Some of them you think like Joel Osteen wrote this. You're like, what is he talking about? I don't think Jesus said that. So, with all due respect to Joel Osteen, the translation matters, especially with those older texts, because people put their own sauce or salsa on it, and it's really bad. That happened.
Let's go with that. It was a bad translation. It had nothing to do with my intellectual rigor. It was just the translation.
That's the answer. There's no way you would not understand Confession. So it's a bad translation. It has nothing to do with you. I just mentioned that you have your PhD in wisdom. You're overflowing with wisdom. And so it's absurd. But happy feast day to St. Augustine. And, he has a unique relationship. This wasn't even part of our banter, but we're off. With the pro-life movement because of these conversions. I mean, he was a extremely bad human being. I guess an immoral pagan, if you just want to sum it up, but that may not do it justice. You couldn't put his life on Netflix. I mean, it's like it's got some stuff, right? And I'm sure Christians met him and gave up on him, just as many meet, or perhaps some meet, those in the abortion industry, and they give up on him. How could a doctor do an abortion? How could a woman have an abortion? Although we don't hear that as much. We hear more of, how could you work there? And I thought that for a long time. And then you meet workers. I mean, if I was in high school, before I went out and started praying at 40 Days for Life vigils, which we're going to talk about today, one of the things you learn, you get to know workers, and you don't agree with them. And you may think, they're totally lost, probably are, but you'll have a little bit better understanding of why they work there. And I think the same goes for St. Augustine. I mean, if you're going to write somebody off, he was like top of the list. He's like chairman of the board of like the Write Me Off committee. I'm a lost cause, but it's a beautiful story.
Absolutely. And it's there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like the Lord continues to do these things, and sometimes it's easy to despair. I remember when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, we sent an email, and we were praying that the Lord welcomes her into heaven, into his heavenly kingdom. And we got a couple of people who were offended that we said that, but there's nobody that's so bad that we want to see them lost forever. And thanks be to God, whether it be St. Augustine all those years ago or abortion workers today, the Lord continues to draw people back to him, even at that last desperate moment.
We don't want anyone in hell.
Yeah, I don't, at least. I guess I can't speak for everybody, but
not only because that's an attack on the virtue of hope, it's also an attack on the mercy of Jesus Christ. We have no idea what's happening the moments that someone dies. Most of us will be unconscious, something that the Imitation of Christ talks a lot about, by the way. But the whole notion that you want somebody to go to hell is pretty bad and pretty rotten and I would say evil. So another author who doesn't have is not a saint, so doesn't have a feast day, but he's up there, is Dante. And if you read Dante's Inferno, which by the way is very hopeful, Dante does give us a roadmap that being a saint is possible. And living a virtuous, consistent, holy life and striving every day to love Christ in the midst of a pagan world, which he found himself in, is possible. And he does it in a very graphic, beautiful, just well-written, prose. And all that said, if you read Dante's Inferno, you don't want to go to hell. You don't want anybody else to go to hell. That's the conclusion of the Divine Comedy. And you definitely want to go to heaven. And if you believe in purgatory, you appreciate it. If you don't believe in it, you really hope that it doesn't exist. Or you hope that it does exist. I've had non-Catholics, Protestant brothers and sisters tell me that, like, hey, I got a new look on purgatory. Never thought of it that way. Thanks, Dante. Okay, adjusting our banter. Labor Day is coming up, Steve, and I just have a quick question, then we'll move on to these top 7 things. What is your feeling about Labor Day weekend? And because the summer has these bookends. Memorial Day is awesome. Saving Private Ryan, pork ribs, the fresh charcoal, although we've been grilling with charcoal for about a month by the time Memorial Day hits. But it's actually the biggest weekend for barbecues in America. It's not the 4th of July, it's Memorial Day, because all the Northerners can finally go outside for the first time. But to me, Labor Day just kind of has a lull compared to Memorial Day. Is that your take as well?
Well, I mean, I just said, I think last week on the podcast that I was turning over a new leaf and I was turning away from my pessimism and I was not going to be depressed about winter coming. So I feel like this is a setup. You're tempting me. Get behind me, Sean.
I am. But... I'm like, I'm Dante going through with Virgil. I'm trying to tempt you.
No, I don't care that much for it. Plus, I don't understand the concept of a day dedicated to work in which we celebrate it by not working. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's controversial. You can't say that, Steve.
Why is that?
Because it's the unions, essentially, who gave us Labor Day, the abused workers. There's that history of it, whether people know that or not, that there was these factories and they didn't care about the workers and they unionized and they did all this stuff. So they got it's just like a little bit of the pat on the head. It's like, yeah, it's like so other things we have.
14-hour days in the coal mines, but hey, if you want, you can take the first Monday of September off every year. Deal.
And now you're happy, right, Bob? And Bob's just supposed to nod. The real reason. Okay, so that's like that's awesome. The real reason, unlike legitimate 3-day weekends like MLK and where you're like actually honoring somebody who changed the world, the real reason is economic. It's a huge, huge moneymaker for the U.S. economy because it's seen as the last full weekend of summer. So people do weekend getaways. They plan vacations around it. It's sort of the last hurrah before you get into the fall. And so it's people go out to eat, they delay their diets, they do all those things. It's just the end of the party that is summer. And it's a huge, without Labor Day, the economic impact of summer would just completely die on that weekend. But instead it has a pop, then it dies. And so from that aspect, the economic aspect was very smart.
I suppose that's true. The other thing I don't know how you feel about this as a father. I hear some of these parents, Sean, and they're saying like, oh, I can't wait until school starts again. And I don't feel that way. I love that my kids are home. I'm like working I'm blessed to have a home office and I see them out the window, like running around. I love that. I love what they're around. And I think I dislike school starting more than I did when I was actually in school. And so Labor Day here, we've got like this kind of along the lines of what you're saying. There's a law that was passed like 20 years ago lobbied by the tourism industry, where I think the public schools, I don't think can start until after Labor Day to maximize the economic engine of that weekend. And so it's always a little bit bittersweet too in that regard, where I'm happy for a day off, but it means the weather, like literally that's on a dime, the weather starts getting cool and then the kids are all gone, and doggone it, Sean, you're tempting me effectively.
I definitely was ready for the kids to go back to school. Mary
Okay.
Lisa was very ready for the kids to go back to school. And not like we hate our kids and we're going to get rid of, not that. We had a blast this summer. We had an absolute blast. But it's just time.
Sure.
It's just time. And it's good for them. And they've been in now 2.5 weeks. It's good for them. It zaps them back into their regular schedule. They get more disciplined. Our kids are very, very well behaved, but we have 8 of them, and it's just loud. And my home office is the opposite motivation, Steve. We're recording a podcast right now. Timothy's the only one home. He's asleep. I mean,
Okay.
over the summer, it was amazingly loud and brutal. So I understand the people that say, yeah, I'm ready for my kids to go back to school because school is good. It's natural to go to school. And so, that's just the way it works. It's the same with all of our friends at homeschool. They're like, no, we're ready for co-op. We're ready to co-op. We got to get out of the house. So
when does school start for your kids?
The older kids, like the 10th or 9th of August.
Wow, first half of August. That's wild.
Yeah, and then the other kids like 2 days later. No,
when do they get out for the summer? When does school end?
The 20th, 21st ish of May.
Okay. All right.
So, and sometimes they go up to the 25th or 26th, but that's rare. And then one of the kids, the little kids' school, they have a fall break, which is just useless. Although I can't because of work, but like a family here, if you were smart, you could like go down to Galveston to the beach because it's still warm. It's like an hour and a half away. So that would be good in October. We don't do that, but some people do. But otherwise, a fall break, the high schools aren't out. So it's just kind of like, why do they do that? They're not aligned. But no, we were ready for the kids to go back, and I think they were most of them, but the starting early is ridiculous because I started nagging them. Like the last firework went off on the 4th of July, like at 10 o'clock at night. I was like, all right, summer's over, and they're like, no. So I start kind of building it up. But Seamus started football practice on July 31st. Okay,
No kidding.
yeah, and they were like, it's 101 degrees. And so a lot of the public schools and private schools started banning practice. His school did not. And so they moved it to 4 in the afternoon, which is like at the height of the heat of the day. And then the coaches kind of realized we're just going to go out there and die. So they moved it to 6 o'clock at night, which was still like 101 degrees. So I got a kick out of it because I grew up doing that. And it was like the temperature didn't matter. You weren't like, it's too hot. You'd never say that in football. You'd get killed because you'd be a wuss. And, and, now the kids are just like, they're out there working out and running and full pads. And it's like 100 degrees. And I'm like, I loved school. I loved high school football, and I don't want to go back to either one. Okay. What are you eating Labor Day? Last thing.
I don't know. I haven't thought about it yet. I probably get some grilling on a little bit. I grill all year long. Like I'll brush snow off of the grill to use it in January if we need to. So there's not really an end of the grilling season in Wisconsin. We don't put a roof on our football stadium, and we don't quit grilling in the winter time. So, well, but we'll probably get some, I don't know, pork shoulder or something. I got a brisket in the freezer. Maybe I'll thaw that out. How about you?
The same. We're gonna grill. We grill all year round, and so I take pride in it being 100 degrees, and I'm standing over a charcoal grill. That's just part of the ego and personal pride of me.
You don't even
So-
need the charcoal. You just put that dome on it, and if it's got the black lid or whatever, it'll cook on its own.
Yeah, because I leave it out there to burn out so the grill can cool off so I can put it back in my garage, and it takes all night. So I just leave it out all night. Yeah. All right. Some positive things in the midst of our world. And the first one's very positive. We have here the top 7 things that you will learn if you participate in 40 Days for Life. And if you've participated, which many of y'all have, you've either learned some of these or you don't realize that you can still learn these, but you need to use these to encourage other people to come out to the vigils because they will learn something. And the first thing I think is the most important thing, Steve, and what you learn at a 40 Days for Life vigil is so important in 2023 because you will learn that the world is not ending.
Yeah, that's so critical right now because if you're at the vigil, by definition, you are not watching the news while you're there and you're not doom scrolling on your phone while you're there. I know Dr. Haywood said that he quit watching the news a couple of years ago and has never had so much peace. And I know
2020, Haywood detached himself from society with COVID and George Floyd. Those were the 2 things. And then Haywood disappeared.
Yeah, and I know others have done that too. Our great leader and longtime faithful podcast listener, Jim in Green Bay, he's pulled out of the news. And that's so important because, look, there's a lot of darkness in our world right now. The abortion facility is a dark place. So I'm not going to say that by going to the vigil, like it's this experience of levity. But I think it connects us with sort of the broader and more historical picture of Christianity, which is the world is a dark place. And that's why we need Jesus Christ in the first place. He didn't come to save us because everything was going great. And when we're out there, we can remind ourselves that the ancient pagan Roman Empire that Jesus ministered to was no friend to human life. Abortion ran rampant, infanticide ran rampant. But, Caesar didn't have the last word. Jesus Christ did have the last word and the first word, the Alpha and the Omega. And I think when we're out there, we plug into our prayer lives where the bad stuff is happening. Suddenly it doesn't seem so scary. We just don't have the luxury of being able to sit around and wring our hands all day and, oh, the world is worse than it used to be. I don't know. Maybe it's worse. Maybe it's not. I mean, these things go in cycles, but one thing remains the same, and that's the Lord.
Yeah. And I would put in this category, it's surprising. Going out and praying at a 40 Days for Life vigil is hard from the perspective of most people when they've never done it. I know that was my case when I first was invited out by Mary Lisa to go pray, is that, oh, that's hard and that's depressing. And who wants to do that? And that's kind of the front lines of the abortion debate. That sounds depressing. And it's not. I think it surprises people how edifying it is and how positive it is to go out and to pray. You feel like you're making a difference because you are. You're improving your prayer life because you're praying, and you're definitely surprised at cars drive by, nothing happens, there's no protesters, there's no crazy people, there's no drama. It's almost quiet. And sometimes there can be a rhythm with the traffic. It's almost like a noisemaker. The cars are going by and then there's a red light. You don't hear anything. It gets very, very quiet out there and then it picks up again. There's a rhythm to it. For all of our senses. And I think that is surprising for people. They go out thinking, I'm going to be depressed and mad at the world and I should stay home and watch the news. But they're not. They're very edified by the prayer. They're edified by the other people out there, and they're edified by the responses they get and they don't get. And that's number 2 on our list, is that the second thing you'll learn, Steve, is that despite what you see on the news and despite what sometimes we have to talk about on the podcast or report on the podcast or emails or the magazine, is that the reality is when we say silent majority, which some people say, like politicians say the American people, you have like 2 politicians that disagree on everything and they're telling the other one what the American people really want, and it's just whatever they're saying. The American people know it. The American people want this. The American people deserve it. And it's whatever they're proposing. But the reality with our issue is there is a silent majority, and you will learn when you go out there, not all abortion advocates are these hardcore, crazy, have an abortion at birth.
Yeah, we've got sort of this false dichotomy, which I suppose it's probably fostered by the same media that we're suggesting staying away from. That everybody's either really, really pro life. You're out of the 40 Days for Life vigil. You've got the 40 Days for Life sticker and the shirts, and you read the 40 Days for Life books, all those sorts of things. So you're really, really pro life, or everybody's really, really pro abortion. They're bombing pregnancy help centers, and they're trying to pass laws to legalize abortion right up to birth or even beyond. And the fact of the matter, for better and for worse, is that most people are somewhere in between. And so if you just strictly go on the media accounts, you would think that an hour out at a 40 Days for Life vigil would be this nonstop barrage of people out there screaming at you and giving you the finger and who knows what. And a handful of those people make themselves known and make their presence felt from time to time. Hey, get a life. Why don't you get a job? But most people, I think the most common reaction when you're out there is curiosity. And think about it. You can drive by anything where there's something that appears to be a protest going on, and you don't know if you're for it or against it. You kind of slow down in your car. What does that sign say? Are they for this place, against this place? What is it all about? And that's why 40 Days for Life is so effective at community outreach, because it draws attention to the abortion crisis. Whether you're for abortion, against abortion, most people, frankly, live somewhere in the middle. Heather Gardner on our team has this great point about how there's a lot of people who describe themselves as pro-life and people who describe themselves as pro-choice. And it turns out they have the same opinions on abortion. It's just sort of the lens with which they view them from. They think some babies should be aborted and some shouldn't. That's where most of the population is. So this is an opportunity, I think, to really pique people's curiosity. Why are you out here? Some of them stop and ask, well, what about the babies that were conceived in rape? You have the opportunity to make that case. And then beyond that, if you think everyone's going to be flipping you off, you're going to get a lot of support. You can tell those little staccato, the long honks, those are the angry ones, but the beep, 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 those are where you see the thumbs up, you see the smile, you see the wave, you see the people stop their car and say, how often are you guys out here? I'm going to join you next time. It's really a mixed bag experience, but not as scary as I think the first timer would expect it to be by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I agree. And folks should know your confidence is going to go through the roof. I think now, especially post-Roe America, people are kind of nervous about abortion coming up. And that's always been the case because it's a controversial issue. But I was picking on the politicians. They're really nervous. The bad ones, the good ones aren't. They own it. But the bad ones are nervous. But I think people in daily life, not for political reasons, but just they may feel ill-equipped. It's one of the reasons we wrote What to Say When. But when you go out to a vigil and you discover this, that not all pro-abortion people, they basically fit in, most of them, into that category that Heather referenced. They believe abortion should be allowed at some point, and they believe it shouldn't be allowed at other points. When you go out to pray and you encounter some of these people, you realize, not in a condescending way, but it stops there. It stops with what we just said. They really don't have any depth to their arguments. Sometimes they don't have a whole lot of passion behind them. We always see you may hear or see it on the news or from us, like the crazy person screaming, but that's like less than 1%. Most of them aren't very passionate. It's a very passive position. I would never have an abortion, but who am I to tell somebody else how to live? I don't think abortion's good, but I do think it's necessary for those who need it. It's always kind of this, like, it's not life and death for them. And we can make it life and death for them by articulating it. But when you go out and you encounter them, I'm talking about Planned Parenthood workers, escorts, certainly the women going in for an abortion, people who pass by, who get into conversations, your fear of talking about abortion will be annihilated with one 40 Days for Life campaign. I can guarantee it. You go out an hour a week. You go out just a couple of times. But if you go multiple times a week, and no one could talk to you, but just being out there and seeing it. You're not running for Congress. You're not creating an ad in Ohio for a pro-abortion candidate. You are where the abortions happen. You are slowly becoming an expert in abortion just by standing there and observing it, because 99% of abortion supporters have never been to an abortion facility. They don't know how they operate. They're completely confused on the model of Planned Parenthood. And you learn a lot just by standing out there. So it's a huge confidence builder, not only realizing, hey, they're not very hardcore and they're not very knowledgeable. Most of them are curious, but also they don't know what they're talking about. And I can, my confidence will skyrocket just by being out here.
There's something that
Um,
goes unspoken with this too, a message that we never have to speak, but we say it, and that's that by virtue of being out there, by virtue of your presence, suggesting and offering hope to encourage women to keep their babies, that sends a message that life is worth living. All this bad stuff in the news, all of the reasons that abortion supporters use to justify abortion, they could be poor, they could be abused, they could X, Y, and Z thing. The presence out there sends a key message that I think, we send this in our lives without speaking of Sean, right? You've got 8 kids. I've got 5. I had a guy joke one time. He's like, you joke about yourself being a pessimist, but I know pessimism, optimism, I don't know, but you have hope, because if you didn't have hope, you wouldn't bring another generation into the world. And I think that is
oh,
such a key message.
yeah, that's very positive. That's a great comment too. I agree with him. You are very pessimistic, yet you do have a lot of kids. So congratulations, Steve. Uh, yeah, it's deep down you're an optimist, and your children are that witness. Um, the next one is funny, but you're gonna learn this, and this is a personal favorite for me. You will learn your weather patterns. You will look at the weather more than you ever have in your life. This is like God's one of his many gifts in making me part of 40 Days for Life, is that he gave me a love for weather. I'm a weather nerd. I like talking about it. I like looking at it. I like other people telling me about their weather. I love the weather. I just joked about how it's 102 degrees here. It's been that way for the last 45 days with no rain. It's going to be that way for the next 20 days. I still check the weather 5 times a day. It's ridiculous, but I love the weather. You will either love the weather, and if you hate the weather, you'll at least know it, because you will learn your weather patterns. And Steve, there's a lot of weather drama with 40 Days for Life. And just for the record, I have been at a campaign in the middle of a hurricane, and I've been at a 40 Days for Life, the original one, when there was a tornado. I didn't know the tornado actually touched the ground. That my shift on that day was from 8 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night. It was a 24-hour vigil, and these guys were coming to relieve me. And I heard we're in like a tornado watch, which is not a big deal in Texas. That happens a lot. But then the warning sirens actually went off, and a tornado had touched on the ground. And my Planned Parenthood worker actually offered to take me home, but I refused because I thought it's too awkward of a car ride. I'll just die or get struck by lightning instead.
Talk about Zeke.
Yeah. 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 Where's the Mississippi abortion guy who was the cowboy fan? I don't think she was a cowboy fan. And so I also didn't want her to like drive into a field and kill me with an axe. So all that ran through my mind. But what this is going to be a cold segment. What's your worst weather story of your campaign?
Sadly, I don't have any really exciting stories like you do with the tornado and the needing to take shelter. We don't have hurricanes. We don't really have floods here. It's just a matter of it gets cold. And yeah, you've lived it. It's probably the type of thing where the day that you came, where we first met in Wisconsin here in January, it wasn't, you always laugh when I say this, the temperature wasn't that cold. It was the wind. It's sort of the, like, it's not the heat, it's the humidity type of thing. That was the deal that day, is the wind was so biting. So we don't really
I thought it was like 7 degrees though.
It was in the 20s that day.
Okay.
And
yeah, should have had a wine shirt on.
Yeah, it had been like 7 degrees like the whole week, and then it got up into the 20s. But the wind was we're talking like 40-mile-an-hour winds. It felt the wind chill was down very, very low. So the thing that I've really noticed as a 40 Days for Life guy is you have to kind of pick these milestones. And just living in Wisconsin, that's the case too. Like the spring campaign, we know, of course, is not a spring campaign. It's a winter campaign. And when it starts in February, like it will this year, you've got to kind of just like, okay, by mid-February, like we start to see some warmth from the sun. It's not going to be hot out, but the sun will at least warm your neck a little bit while you're out there. And by March, you can start to expect the snow to start melting. And by the end of March, the snow should be gone. Like these are the little sort of like milestones that help you trick yourself into getting through the campaign. That's for the spring campaign, of course. But I also have, I don't know if you have any particular gear that you have just for 40 Days for Life, but until they wore out, I, for a long time, had a pair of dedicated 40 Days for Life woolen socks, and I would only wear them during 40 Days for Life. You need to put on a pair of regular socks and then a pair of woolen socks on the outside, and that helps with some of the overnight shifts.
Mine wasn't a wardrobe issue. It was just the reminder and the great need for sunscreen for the fall campaign, which is the summer campaign in Texas.
Yeah.
And then I thought I would be considered like a wuss if I had an umbrella in the sun. And so I know my first few years of going out to the Vigil, especially in college, I mean, I was like, it was awesome. I mean, I got burned and then I got a tan. And Mary Lisa's like, you need to put some sunscreen on. So then I realized it's just hot and stupid and unnecessary to sit out there in the sunlight. So I converted to the umbrellas. And now, of course, we have these cool 40 Days for Life umbrellas that you can, of course, use in the rain, but definitely in the sun. I think they're probably used more in the sun. But yeah, that was that. Forgetting sunscreen was bad because I got sunburned a lot. And we started using that locally as a reason to participate in 40 Days for Life in College Station, is that you would get a tan. And that was one of our highlights that we really pointed out to churches, particularly churches that didn't really care about saving the unborn. So we were like, hey, well, you can be tan. By that time,
Yeah.
lost interest. But
we had a guy who would, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We had a campaign back in 2009 where it rained, snowed, or even hailed 21 of 40 days. And it just so happened that it would rain overnight every single Thursday of the campaign. We've got a guy on our team named Kurt, and he would take, I think, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. every Thursday, and it just happened to rain, snow, or hail every shift that he had out there. So I think he earned up some treasure in heaven that year.
Yeah, he kind of had the mark of the beast, the poor guy. I mean, it's just like it's like the worst time period to be out there. We had a student who took 2 to 6 every day in the afternoon. And he was legitimately miserable, like a week into it. And he wanted to quit, but he didn't want to quit. But he decided he wasn't going to quit. He just complained all the time.
All
And
right.
we thought, well, the vigil's still full, because that was our hardest shift, 2 to 6 in the afternoon, that time period. Hard to fill because it's just the heat of the day. It's awful. All right, so you'll be an expert on weather. You'll definitely learn that. This next one is good. And this goes into the stereotypes are not true. Shocker. You will learn who is coming in for abortions.
I think that's the sort of thing where when you start out with sidewalk outreach, it can be a little bit like, well, I don't even know who's coming for an abortion, who's coming for this, who's coming for a test, who's coming to the convenience store that happens to share a driveway with Planned Parenthood. It can be very difficult, but somehow or another, there's some telltale signs. You know, you see the baggy sweatpants and things like that, and they're coming accompanied sometimes by a support person. You can kind of get the feel for it, but I've noticed from so many hours being out there, I can even just tell as the car is down the block, I can just kind of get a feel for like the speed, the level of acceleration, those sorts of things, whether they're going to turn into that parking lot or not. It's just something you just pick up. There's, like I said, the telltale signs, but you just know.
Yeah, you just know. And you always hear, I remember one of the surprising things that I learned is I'm like, well, it's a bunch of college kids having abortions. That's why they're here. And that was, but the majority of them were not. The majority of them were what we unfortunately have learned about Planned Parenthood, minorities, people from the countryside, the rural areas streaming in to our facility from maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour away. Of course, we got college kids, but that you'll really learn. Also, suburbia moms just going in for an abortion, just like what's going on. So it is. It's very telling, and I think in that category, they're not showing up and jumping out of their car and screaming about reproductive rights and storming in. They're very wide-eyed to see you. I think the women going in for the abortions, if we didn't have these obnoxious escorts who hate choice. It's different if we're like screaming at her, but we're not doing that. But we're like offering free medical help. And these Planned Parenthood escorts just like rush them in and say, "Oh, get away from these people. They're crazy." And you know, that's choice. Otherwise, if they didn't have escorts, we would save a lot more babies. That's why they have escorts. Because they're not interested in choice, and they're definitely not interested in anybody considering keeping their baby or offering their baby up for adoption. So I think that's one of the big things you learn is how abortion is a bottom line business for Planned Parenthood. When they show up, it's like they're arriving on a used car lot. The vultures just like sink their teeth into them and get them inside and get the abortion done as quick as possible. And that is a sobering, sad thing that you will see and that you will learn, in addition to learning, you know, who's coming in for abortions.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, but it's also I just find it fascinating how you sort of develop, particularly people who have been doing sidewalk outreach together. If you ever have the chance to go to the Milwaukee, Wisconsin 40 Days for Life Vigil, Dan and September lead it, and they're like the quarterback and the wide receiver that know when to change the play. Like I can see like Dan kind of like engage with a woman on the sidewalk, but there's another one coming, she's a block away, and just sort of like a little flick of the eyes gestures to September, and she goes over, and she like they have like this mind mouth thing going on. It's really remarkable. And I the point of all of this, I think, is that as you get there, you know, if you're new at this, if you're considering going, maybe you're listening to the podcast looking to be convinced to go out when the vigil starts on September 27th, you just pick things up and you develop an expertise. This is where we say in our training, you don't need to be an expert in anything. You just go there and the Lord works with you, and it really can manifest itself in some pretty interesting and exciting ways.
Yeah, really can. And it's awesome. And it's you'll be surprised. You'll absolutely be surprised. But you gotta go out. You've got to go out. Okay. This kind of falls into our next thing that you'll learn is that you, when you go out, will be glad that you're there. I think that is another surprising thing because there's a wall up. I don't think I want to go. I won't enjoy it. I'll go because of duty. Maybe God is calling me, and he is. Maybe I have an obligation to my fellow man. You do. We're just guilting people now, but I'm going to go. It's not going to be fun. This isn't college football. I'm not smoking ribs. I'm taking time away from those things. I'm not going to enjoy it. I'm not going to have a lot of peace, but I'm going. And then God, in his grace, gives you a lot of peace, and you're glad that you're there. You're not happy and telling jokes, but you are very much at peace when you're out in front of an abortion facility. And it's why we always use the analogy of being at the foot of the cross. You know, John and Mary Magdalene they're not happy. They're not having a party as our Lord is suffering, but they are at peace. They are at peace because they're at the feet of the Prince of Peace. And that's what we have to trust, both when we ourselves are going out or trying to get out of going out, but certainly when we're recruiting others to go out, you're asking them to do something that will bring them peace. Your product, if you will, is good, and it gives peace. So don't hesitate to ask people. You're not asking them to go get a colonoscopy. Just be like, you don't have to be hesitant. You can say, hey, you want to do this. You just don't know how badly you want to do it. And you have no idea what the impact will be.
Yeah, and I think the Lord speaks very powerfully on the sidewalk. I would describe myself as easily distracted in prayer. I don't know what that says about me. I'm told that it's a good reason to not give up. And so I figure, well, no matter how bad my prayer is, I'm going to continue praying. But I find that I'm better at prayer, or perhaps the Lord just does more with me when I'm out at Planned Parenthood. He sort of draws you into the mystery of the cross, of the passion, of all of the different things that he has come to conquer through his resurrection. And I find myself less distracted when I'm out there than perhaps anywhere else, maybe even church. I don't know. I don't know what that says about me, but I find myself deep in prayer at Planned Parenthood more so than most other places.
Well, there you go. You heard it on the podcast. Steve's prayer life deepens more so. Although I do think you should be deeper in prayer at church. But anyways, Steve, maybe it's the
No,
there's
I'm
less
willing to accept that
distractions.
that's a personal defect. I acknowledge that. I think here's what I think it is.
Hey,
In
I
a real
refuse
sense.
to acknowledge that you have any personal defects. So there you go.
I appreciate that, Clark. I think some of what it is that the Lord is very effective at working in a broken heart, and your heart is broken at Planned Parenthood, and there's a lot that he can do with that.
Yeah, that's so well said. So true. And that's the explanation. Beautiful. All right. The sixth thing you will learn, can't say it enough. If you pray, God will hear your prayer.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't come the way you expect it. I've often said that God always gives us what we need and when we need it. He doesn't always give us any more than we need or any sooner than we need it. But the Lord answers our prayers out there. And we've got all these wonderful stories of the people who go out to the vigil, and maybe they're there for a long time. Maybe they're out there repeatedly. They don't see anything happening. They wonder whether it makes a difference. And I think oftentimes the enemy, the devil, wants to tempt us into thinking that this isn't worth it. Right when we're on the brink of the biggest successes. I can't tell you how many conversations with leaders, and I've experienced it myself, where when things look the darkest, you're like, I don't know, this doesn't seem to be working. Maybe my time is better spent somewhere else. You hang on, you persevere just a little bit longer, and the Lord blesses you with some victory. Maybe it's the saved baby. Maybe it's the worker who leaves. Maybe it's the abortion facility that closes down. We were in a very dark place right before we achieved the final victory, where my alma mater bailed on its plans to do late-term abortions. These things happen all the time. So just hang in there. I think there's a story from the early days of 40 Days for Life where there was like the mother-daughter duo maybe that was leading the 40 Days for Life campaign. They saw no fruits, no results, couldn't even get a single other soul to join them at the vigil. And then months down the line, found out there was a local pastor that was baptizing a baby that was saved from abortion through their presence. Suddenly, all of the frustration and the broken hearts were all worth it in that moment. So hang in there.
Yeah, it was in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a great story. Great story. Okay, our last thing that you will learn, and this is, I know most, or if not all, 40 Days for Life leaders can relate to this. I can certainly relate to it. Steve, I know you can relate to it. If you do this, God will show you that he will use you in ways that you don't think that you're capable of being used, and for his greater glory. And that is when you take a leader, ourselves. I mean, if you'd have told me the first time I went out to pray in an abortion facility that I would ever have to give a pro-life talk, that I would do a pro-life interview, that I would write pro-life books, I would have said that you're a nut. And I also would have been terrified of doing all those things. But God, when you sort of step out in faith, especially now in 2023, when just there's so much woundedness, there's so much anger, and yet the world's just kind of still the same. It's Christianity versus paganism, essentially, and truth versus error. And that's when you step out in that, he's going to use you, and he's going to use you in ways that you don't think that you're capable. I don't know one 40 Days for Life local leader. I don't know one first-time 40 Days for Life volunteer, and we've had a million of them, literally, who has said, yeah, I'll do that. It's not a big deal. Okay, so you're going to show up on Wednesday at Planned Parenthood from 3 to 4, and you're going to pray in front of that abortion facility. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Who cares? I mean, nobody has that approach because of what they're approaching, and because, as we often say, we're not food for the poor. It's not feel good to half of our population. Half of our population doesn't want us out there. There are pro-lifers that don't think we should go out and pray at the abortion facilities. Not the majority of them, thank God. But we go, and you're going to see how God uses you. We look at all the leaders he's lifted up. We look at people who said, I'm gonna terrified that the local ABC news station is gonna come out there. The reporters are so liberal, they hate us. And then, a year later, that same leader, she's doing 5 interviews a week and she's a rock star. He is going to use you, and he will help you get over it. He'll help you get over the fear. He'll help you get over any anxiety. He'll help you get over any hesitation, and in the process, he'll make it fun, and he'll transform you into a great leader who can get other people to trust God and to go out there as well.
That's why I'm so hesitant and reluctant when I see the word just. It's very easy to minimize things. A lot of people will say, well, I'm going to go out to your 40 Days for Life vigil. I'm not going to sidewalk counsel. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to stand out there and pray. And that's the mustard seed that the Lord works with to move mountains, because so many people, that's Dan Miller, who we mentioned a moment ago. Dan Miller was just going to go out and pray for just an hour. He was never going to come back. He did it to appease a friend who invited him repeatedly. And now Dan Miller has saved 2,000 babies, I think, out on the sidewalks of Milwaukee. Just quote unquote, just standing there makes a big difference. We know that it does because of that statistic that 75% no-show rate can occur when someone is just standing out there. But so often it doesn't end with that. The people get trained in sidewalk outreach. They take leadership positions. We have seen, this is a stat that we don't have, Sean, which I don't know how to track, but I wish we did. How many pregnancy centers were started as a result of someone just going out to do 40 Days for Life and feeling called to do more?
Yeah, that is a fun stat. It's over 15, I know for sure, easily off the top of my head. And I've personally spoken at 5 of their kickoff banquets, dating back to 2008, when the 40 Days for Life leaders just started a pregnancy center next door and added an ultrasound. There's way more than 15. No, I've spoken at 6 or 7, like kickoff fundraising banquets for pregnancy resource centers that started next to abortion facilities from the 40 Days for Life volunteers. We were just going to do one 40 Days for Life campaign, Steve, in 04. And then when we launched it national in 07, we were going to do just one in the fall. And then we were going to just do one Lent campaign, and then just maybe one more year. That's the case for all of us. We were just going to do the symposium every other year. That was the original plan for the symposium. And then the leaders just went berserk and said, this is the greatest thing ever. We need to do it every year. And we do it every year. And we just had our largest, last month, 500 leaders. So no, I've never heard it worded that way. The word just is a bad word. It's good, Steve.
It's funny too, because the folks who, it's not as though you go out and pray and then suddenly you want to do all these sorts of things. Like the Lord makes it clear that you belong doing it. It's sort of like almost like you're compelled by the Holy Spirit, because some of the people who have said, oh, I'm never going to talk to a woman, I'll just pray, they become the best people at sidewalk outreach, and it becomes so evident that it's a calling. This isn't a hobby for anybody. They're going out there and they're making it happen because the Lord has a mission for them. And I wonder how many people in our society, they just have, for whatever reason, have ignored, haven't heard, that they don't know what they're being called to do. But each of us has a purpose. And when you go out there and just pray, the Lord can do a lot with that. I've been in so many different circumstances where I'm like in whatever city and there's babies being saved, or we're wherever and we're giving the pro-life talk. And I think, you know what, I just signed up for an hour to pray, and who knows what the Lord can do with that. So many pro-lifers have a similar story.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you just see it happen all the time. You mentioned Dan Miller, who was terrified to go out the first time, said he'd rather have his teeth pulled than go out. And no, it's a great use of the word just, and to kind of stay away from it. And you have this opportunity. I think also now, one of the hard things for me in like 2005 or 6 or 10 is just being at a 40 Days for Life vigil and looking at a massive abortion facility. And we had Obama and, or we had Bush, but it was just, Planned Parenthood was huge. They had a massive presence under George W. Bush. We were excited about Roberts being nominated. That's how bad it was. There's just a lot of thoughts where you're like, we're not going to win. Roe will never be overturned. We're just so far from that. And we were in 2005, 2007, 2010. The idea that the Supreme Court would overturn Roe is just like foreign. It's hopeful, but not realistic. And I think now post Roe, where we've seen obviously so many great things possible through the pregnancy centers and through 40 Days for Life, but now on a level that's just on Fox News every day or CNN, which is the Supreme Court overturned Roe. You know, that's a big cultural shift that all this stuff from the grassroots helped lead to and get us a president like Trump, who gave us the triplets, to make that happen. And Trump listening to specific people telling him you need to put them on the court. That was really good. But now post Roe, like, who doesn't want to be part of this? Who doesn't want to be part of history? And who wants to risk being on the wrong side of history through inaction? Obviously, there's a lot of people sprinting to the wrong side of history. They're like advocating for abortion in a post-Roe world. They want the slaves back. They're like, we released them and it's a nightmare. We need to go back. Okay. History doesn't judge those people very well, nor should it. And that's what we're going to have. We have people clamoring to dehumanize the unborn across our country. That's what they're clamoring for. But they're not on our side. Those on our side, like the pro-lifers, how do we not want to be part of this moment in history where we could be like, I didn't really do anything, but I lived through it. I saw it and I agreed with it, but I didn't jump in. So that's what this podcast is about, jumping in. And I'm going to review the 7 things you will learn if you do jump in. And we're going to put these on the screen. Number 1, the world isn't ending. Good news. Number 2, most people are not hardcore pro-abortion supporters. Number 3, you will learn weather patterns. Number 4, who's coming in for abortions. Definitely learn that. You will also learn that maybe you didn't want to go to the vigil, but once you're there, you don't want to go home. Number 6, if you wait for him, God will answer your prayers. And number 7, God can use you to do things you didn't think you were capable of. And those are the 7 things you will learn if you participate in 40 Days for Life, starting on Wednesday, September the 27th, just about a month from today. And so be sure to go to 40daysforlife.com. We have a lot of big news coming, and that's all I can say about that, as Forrest Gump famously said. But we have a lot coming out, and in the midst of that, be praying for 40 Days for Life. You'll see when you see the news coming out that we do need your prayers. It's all good. It's all good. But we need prayer. And in the midst of that, pray for the campaign and have that lead you into praying at your 40 Days for Life starting on September 27th, because our country and our world needs prayer. And we certainly, as we have so many who listen to this around the world, as we're in 64 countries, we need the prayers of everyone as we go into such an important 40 Days for Life campaign on September the 27th. And so be sure to watch your email inbox. Also, we'll be releasing the new 40 Days for Life devotional, High Demand. It's brand new. It's awesome. 40-day journey through the life of Jesus Christ. So be sure to pick that up so that you can follow along. You can pre-order those now. They'll be in soon, so you'll get your copy, but be sure to order those directly from 40 Days for Life or from Amazon. You can get them on Amazon as well, but order directly from us. It helps our mission more. We can make more money. So be sure to do that, and you'll have a little companion to get you through the campaign. So thank you, Steve. Please rate, review, and share this podcast, and we will see you next time. God bless you.